All right, so we're going to run through some of the notes that we took during the reteach for this year so far. Um, a lot of this has already been covered in previous videos if you're making your way down the playlist, but here we are. So if you look at the uh, food chain, you're always going to start with the producers and then the primary consumer and then the secondary consumer, right? And only 10% of the energy gets transferred from one trophic level to the next trophic level. Okay. And here we have the photosynthesis and cellular respiration. They make up the main part of the carbon cycle. And the reactants of photosynthesis, carbon dioxide, water, and light, are the lead to the products of sugar and oxygen. Sugar is an energy molecule, right? But our cells can't use that. So in the mitochondria, cellular respiration takes the sugar and the oxygen and makes carbon dioxide and water and ATP, a usable energy molecule. Okay. So photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast. Cellular respiration happens in the mitochondria. If you have a terrarium with some plants and some little insects or snails or something, that can keep itself going as long as there is gas exchange. As long as the animals are putting out carbon dioxide and the plants take in the carbon dioxide and put out oxygen that the animals use. Okay, so it's a cycle. There are four main groups of organic molecules: proteins, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and fatty acids or lipids. Okay, so oils, waxes, lipids, these are a lot of them are from fatty acids. And proteins have nitrogen containing amino groups. That's why they're made out of amino acids. Carbohydrates are usually carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. By the way, anything that ends in ose is a sugar. So glucose, fructose, maltose, lactose, those are sugars. Nucleic acids, you have a 5-carbon sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogenous base. In DNA, your bases are adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. And your sugar is deoxyribose. So that's why it's DNA. It's deoxyribose nucleic acid. Fatty acids, okay, they are basically carbons and hydrogens. Okay, a saturated fatty acid or a saturated fat is going to be pretty much all carbon and hydrogen. Okay, and then an unsaturated fat has this double bond right here for this oxygen, and so if this oxygen went away, it could hold 2 more hydrogens. So this is unsaturated with hydrogens. All right. Coal forms from ancient swamps. Oil forms from ancient oceans. And so in ancient oceans, the plankton would die and fall down to the bottom and become sediment. And over time, those sediment layers build up. And the heat and the pressure from all that weight cause the decay, the phytoplankton to change into oil. Okay. In swamps, you had dead plants and trees and maybe some animals, and they get buried under sediments, and the heat and pressure changes them into coal. Okay. So again, with both of these and natural gas, they're hydrocarbons. They're carbons and hydrogens. So I believe it's mostly the lipids and fats and oils and stuff that get changed into the fossil fuels. Here's the carbon cycle again. Just a note that when animals die, their carbon compounds go into the soil and they get used by other plants and then eaten. The plants get eaten, and so forth and so on. Also, in theory, photosynthesis and carbon dioxide should just keep each other going, and everything should be fine. But humans burn fossil fuels, and that adds carbon dioxide to the atmosphere that wasn't in the atmosphere for like 65 million years. So that's how we have contributed to climate change. We're adding carbon compounds to the air that weren't there for millions of years. Just a note about carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. Carbon monoxide will kill you, right? It replaces the oxygen in your bloodstream. And so every winter, there's a story about someone who maybe they bring a grill into their home to try to stay warm during a power outage, or maybe they're running a generator in their garage. Either way, the carbon monoxide builds up, and carbon monoxide makes you feel sleepy, and maybe you have a headache, and you say, I just need to go lay down. And you go lay down, and if the room doesn't get ventilated or you don't get brought out of that environment, you can die because the carbon monoxide keeps replacing oxygen. So you have less and less oxygen going to your brain and your organs. Carbon dioxide won't kill you. The lack of oxygen can kill you, right? So like if you're in a sealed vault and no air can get in or out, you're going to constantly convert oxygen to carbon dioxide. And the lack of oxygen would eventually possibly kill you. But carbon dioxide itself is fairly harmless to you. Now, in the environment, in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide traps heat. And that's why we call it a greenhouse gas. It traps heat. The problem is that, again, we're adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere from 65 million years ago, right? So for millions of years, our environment has developed without that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And now we're digging it up, burning it, and putting it back into the atmosphere. So that is going to have an effect. Just a brief word about the nitrogen cycle. Plants cannot use the nitrogen in the atmosphere. It has to be fixed. And so there are nitrogen fixing bacteria that convert through a chemical reaction, they convert atmospheric nitrogen into a usable form that the plants can use. And then crop rotation is where maybe one growing season the farmer grows corn, right? But then they harvest the corn and send it away. They sell it. So that means you've lost nutrients in your soil every time you do that. So then maybe the next growing season they plant peanuts. And the peanuts have little nitrogen fixing bacteria in their roots. And so they help put nitrogen back in the soil. So then when you plant corn again, hopefully you use less fertilizer. This is a classic example of in London during their Industrial Revolution, the ash trees, which have a light colored bark, got covered in soot, making them appear darker. And the idea is that they had light colored moths and dark colored moths. So before this Industrial Revolution, it was much easier to see the dark colored moths. And so they got eaten by birds and frogs more often. And so the population shifted to being mostly light colored moths. Okay. Now, after the Industrial Revolution and the tree trunks were covered in soot, now all of a sudden the dark colored moths have the advantage. And so the population shifts to being mostly dark colored moths. That's natural selection in both cases, before and after. Okay. Natural selection does not mean you have to be the biggest or the strongest or the smartest or the dumbest or the slowest. It just means you have to be better able to survive and reproduce. That's all natural selection is. Tundra, remember, has a layer of permafrost. So you're not going to see a lot of trees. You're going to see mosses, lichens, maybe some shrubs. Types of seed dispersal. So seeds can be dispersed by wind, like a maple seed or a dandelion. Berries are enticing to birds who eat them, and then they poop the seeds out somewhere else, and the seeds can sprout. Something like a mango has a tough outer covering, and so when an animal eats the mango, all right, and then it poops out the seed, that outer covering has been broken down, and the seed can get moisture and it can sprout and become a mango tree. Okay. And then also there are seeds that have little hooks on them, like sandburrs. And so when an animal walks past the plant, the seeds get stuck to the animal until the animal walks away and eventually drops the seed falls off and it grows in a new place. Just some prefixes you need to know. Hetero means different, homo means the same, troph means nutrition, auto means self, and sapro means decomposer. So a saprotroph is an organism that gets nutrition from decomposing things, like a mushroom. All right. An autotroph means that it gets nutrition from itself, like a plant photosynthesizing. Heterotroph means it gets its nutrition by eating something else. Okay. Imprinting is like when a baby chick watches the mama hen and peck the ground, and so then the baby pecks the ground, and it eventually learns, hey, these bugs are tasty, and so then it knows to eat the bugs. All right. Conditioning. So Pavlov did this experiment where he took some dogs, and every time he fed the dog, he rang a bell. So he'd feed the dog, ring a bell, feed the dog, ring a bell, feed the dog, ring a bell, feed the dog, ring a bell. Eventually, he rang the bell without feeding the dogs. And the dogs began to salivate and they acted like they were going to get food. They had been conditioned that if they hear a bell, then there is food. Okay. Your dog, if you have one, probably knows that when the doorbell rings, there's someone at the door, so it may start barking. Okay. And then when the dog hears a doorbell on the TV, they start barking because they've been conditioned that if there's a doorbell, there's some stranger at the house. Types of symbiosis. Okay. Symbiosis just means close relationship. So mutualism is a type of symbiosis where both parties benefit. Commensalism is also a type of symbiosis, but in commensalism, one organism benefits and the other is not affected. Parasitism is where one organism benefits by harming the other. So tapeworms, intestinal worms, fleas, ticks, mosquitoes, they are parasites. They benefit by harming another organism. Okay. Commensalism, a classic example is you have buffalo walking around and their hooves make little holes in the ground as they walk. And then there are birds that follow behind the buffalo and they eat the insects in the hoof prints. Okay. Now, the buffalo is not affected. It is not benefited. It is not harmed. But the bird does benefit by being near the buffalo. Okay. So that's commensalism. And a classic example of mutualism is a lichen. You have an algae living inside of a fungus. So the fungus provides a home and the algae provides food from photosynthesis. So That is mutualism. They both benefit. Blood types. So the phenotypes for blood type are going to be A, AB, B, or O. Right? That's what it's going to say on your blood donor card. Genotype is the actual genes you have. So for type A, you could be AO or AA. Okay? The O gene, you don't make any antigens, A or B. A means you make A antigens. AB means that you have one gene to make A and one gene to make B. Type B, you're either BO or BB. And the only way you can be type O is if you have two genes for the recessive O trait. Okay? Remember that diploid means you have two of each chromosome. Haploid means you have one of each chromosome. So you have half the number of chromosomes. A gamete or a sex cell, sperm or an egg, will have one of each. So gametes are haploid. And so when a sperm and an egg combine, they form a diploid zygote or fertilized egg. Carrying capacity is the number of organisms an environment can support with its resources. If a species goes above the carrying capacity, then there won't be enough resources like food, or maybe there'll be too much competition and the population will go down below the carrying capacity and then it'll go back up. And eventually it should kind of level off. In a forest, you have the canopy, right? And that's going to block a lot of the sunlight from getting down to any seeds or plants down here. But if a tree were to die or fall over in a storm, then light can reach the bottom and you're going to get new plants sprouting and growing down here in this little oasis of sunshine. Exponential growth is usually a curved line on a graph, and it just means that each increase is bigger than the increase before. So if you start with one bacteria and it divides, you now have two. You increased by one. But then both of those cells divide, now you have four. So the increase was by two. And then those four can all divide. Now you have 8. So the increase by 4. And then it would be 16, and then 32, and then 64. So that's exponential growth. Each increase is bigger than the previous increase. All right, that's going to be it for the first video. I'll see you in the next one.